Hello, all you happy people, all you book lovers. Hello, Chelsea.
Hello, Mac. We're back
Oh.
again.
We
And
are.
one round.
We keep coming back. That's true. We are the rebels of the literary world.
Yes.
We're like the
Another
Star
thing
Wars.
to add to my ever-growing title. I've always wanted to be a rebel.
All right, so we got three: diplomatic immunity, walking vial of chaos, and rebel.
And rebel.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you can even go higher than that. I feel like I've peaked, and anything beyond this is superfluous.
What?
I mean, I feel like that title. I mean, I don't want to like dominate the world because that's way too much trouble. I don't want
True.
to like rule the universe because no. Like I'm good with that. That is a solid title. Diplomatic immunity, just chaos everywhere I go, which makes me a rebel.
A rebellious walking vial of chaos with diplomatic immunity.
Tell me that wouldn't be amazing. Everyone's worst nightmare.
Well, not technically, because you're very easily amused to be able to move around and stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah. Today's book that we're going to be talking about is Surrender by Mr. Lee Schneider, and this book is definitely a creative way of looking at sci-fi because there's multiple views on certain things that we're dealing with today.
I think I disagree. I think it's a great entrance into sci-fi because it's very basic sci-fi. There it's not too crazy. It's kind of you can see how it could tie into today's world while
Hmm.
also having a few unexpected twists and things that we don't have here, but just light. So like if you've never read sci-fi before and you're not quite sure if it's your thing, I think this one would be a good one to start with. It's nothing too heavy. It's not like you're getting thrown into space or anything like that. Like you're it's like a day-to-day situation.
Which is nice, that slice of life feeling. But it also, like I said, it talks about a lot of things with modifying the human body, dealing with AI, as well as creating an area that even the littlest things like water can be artificial now, comparative to the actual thing, and it being something that goes onto an expense account. But we'll get into that later. Right now, why don't we just decide to bring on the author himself, Mr. Lee Schneider?
Hey,
Hello, good sir.
Hey,
hey, thanks for having me on the show. Sounds like you're already into an interesting conversation.
we
Well,
try. We're the world's most interesting people. That's that drinking guy, right? That's the beer guy, the most interesting guy in the world.
Right.
yes. Lee, thank you for being on the show. We appreciate it. So, before we get into anything else, we always have this one little thing that we ask our authors to do. Can you tell us what your book is about in, we'll go 10 words or less this time?
The consequences of letting AI control even the climate.
That's
Not
true.
too shabby.
Not
That's
too
pretty
bad.
good. It might have been 10 words or close, maybe.
It's close. It's close enough. Close
Close
enough.
enough? Okay.
Could you introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell them a little bit about yourself. And one of the biggest things we'd like to know is something that we can't find out about you anywhere else.
Interesting. Well, let's see. I've been so public lately, so the last part will be hard, but I'll try. I have a long run at writing and mostly published nonfiction books, television, movies, documentaries, lots of stuff that I've written. I've been writing since I was a kid, and when I decided to make a living at it, the novels weren't quite cutting it. So I just for making a living. So I decided to become more involved in documentaries and television and things like that. This book it's my first published novel, which is a funny sentence for me to say, since I've written two or three others that I just put in the drawer that I didn't think were quite there. This one caught on enough in my own mind, really, because writing a novel is worse than running a marathon. It's running a marathon with maybe only a little water or something. You really have to love doing it and love writing the book. So this is the one that made it to the finish line for me. And I'm working on the sequel now, and I'm almost at the first draft of that finish line after about 8 or 9 months. This one took more than 2 years to put together. Just because of the
or your second one.
Surrender took me more than 2 years. I had it kind of in an outline, and I can look at early notebooks and things like that. So it took a long time to come into focus, but when it did, it was kind of unstoppable. I could just go at it every day and do what I needed to do.
Interesting.
So that's kind of my entry into it.
Tell us something that we can't find out anything out about you besides here, that you're willing to give up and is not going to be held against you later on.
Oh, why not embarrass myself? No, just
why not?
Why not? It's just a podcast. Yeah, you won't tell anyone. Well, the thing that is not that well known about me, but is out there, is that I wrote a lot of cartoons. When I first came to California, I was a writer on Thundercats. People know that because I've been on panels to talk about Thundercats. I wrote 5 episodes. But I also wrote, that company, Rankin Bass, did other cartoons, obviously. They did Frosty the Snowman. That's their big one. And I was a story editor on Silverhawks, which is another one of theirs. But since the Mario Brothers movie is out, I did write an episode of the Super Mario cartoon, which was pretty bad, as I remember.
Yes, I have to say, yes, it was bad, but it was great.
And maybe bad enough to be good. And my contribution to it, I would say, fits in the realm of also bad, probably. I also wrote a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles episode with a writing partner of mine, which the story editor said was the worst script for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles ever submitted. He was a blunt fellow, but they paid us. They paid us the $5,000. It was called Rust Never Sleeps because we liked Neil Young. And I'm sure, there's a lot of overlap between Neil Young fans and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle fans. But
all the time.
But I did love writing cartoons because it really taught me how to write screenplays, because the visualization and you have people sometimes in Japan or Korea, and you have to write something for them, and you'll get at the time faxes back saying, well, you have a spaceship here and you have a spaceship here, but when do they pass in space? And, I'd written plays, so I knew about blocking and upstage and downstage. But this whole 3D, 4D, multidimensional thing of stuff flying around was, wow, and you really had to think through where everything was. And when someone walks, when Lionel walks in the cave, where's the other part of the cave? Where's that other person? If Panthro jumps on a up in a tree or something, like how high is the tree? Because you will be asked those questions by the animators because they need to know. It was a pretty cool experience all in all, and I probably could have kept doing it forever, but the scripts started getting sillier and sillier, because it's cartoons. So how far can you take it?
As far as the toy companies want to take it.
Yeah, I got in trouble for, I can't remember whether it was Mattel or we had a sponsor for Silverhawks, and they insisted that we write the toy into the episode. It's a space, it takes place in space, and they were bathtub toys. Okay, so I said, gentlemen, these are bathtub toys. This is a space show. So we had to invent planets with water and, stuff like that. And they caught me, but I started to destroy every toy. Like, the toy would make its entrance and then the bad guys would immediately destroy it with ray guns or lasers or something. I tried to make sure that the toy only had like 10 seconds of screen time at most. But then, of course, they stopped me and I couldn't do that anymore.
They were like, hey, wait a second. We noticed every time we ask you to do this, something happens to the toy.
Something happens, yeah.
Did you know that?
Sings.
What?
Yeah.
They did what? I like it. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So then, how did you make the bridge from doing the cartoons to deciding to like what made this novel so much more special than the other ones you had worked on?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think a lot of it is just climate change itself and living in California. We have had some, well, now the East Coast and the Midwest are having smoke events. We'd had some pretty serious wildfires and smoke events, and it really, to not be able to go outside and to not go for a run and to wear a mask it and with the pandemic as well, just that whole suddenly all these assumptions we made about our world are just not assumable any longer. That kind of blew me away. And I started thinking about what kind of world we were leaving for the next generations. Were we, as the expression goes, were we being good ancestors? And I quickly realized, no, not. So the dilemma for me became this utopian, dystopian flip flop. And by that, I mean, dystopia is easy, but utopia is hard. It's easy to write a dystopia, hard to write a brilliant one like any of Philip K. Dick's books, but easy to write a dystopian thing where everyone, gets ruined in the end. But to think about providing a pathway into a future that's actually livable is a lot harder. And something about that appealed to me. That difficulty of doing that seemed to, in a weird way, make sense. So that's kind of the internal motor that sort of fired up and kept going that let this one get to where it is.
So let me ask you about this because obviously, during our last episode, we were talking about the accuracy that when dealing with historical fiction, it has to be historically accurate in some way, shape, or form, even though it is a fiction. The same thing goes with science fiction. There has to be some technological research that has to happen for it to be accurate and even to create something new. What were some of the things that you had to research the most to get you to be as accurate as possible when creating better technology in the future?
Another great question. And I'm actually in this area breaking a big rule. And that rule is that I decided in Surrender not to explain any technology, not to do Arthur C. Clarke, not to be a satellite scientist, not even to be Kim Stanley Robinson, who does, in the Ministry for the Future, just does an amazing job of explaining future technologies. I thought I will answer the question, but I wanted to put this wrapper around it. Is that I decided I don't know how my electric car works. I mean, I don't know how this works really. I mean, I couldn't take this computer apart and figure out how we're talking to each other. So I thought people in the future are not really going to know and might not even care how the most bizarre, mind-blowing stuff works. Like anti-grav, it's just going to be anti-grav. It's just going to be there. With that said, I did a lot of research on how bad things were going to get and in what way in the climate. I've read all the reports about how much rainfall there might be or how little, or what areas might be farmable still and what might not be, tracked year by year, 2020, 2030, 2050, and on. Things, unless things change by 100 years from now, things look pretty bad. By 2050, if we made some changes, we have a shot at a livable planet, but we have to keep going. The whole business with artificial water, that comes from desalination, and this can be done now. The business with pods and isolation. I was reading, there's an architectural firm during the pandemic which was redesigning its thinking about buildings. So there were no elevators and there were wide open rooms with spaces and air. And so all of that, I'm a heavy, heavy reader of articles, scientific papers. I have this whole system that I've evolved using various apps, if you're interested, but I will, I capture things from the web or from papers or PDFs. I highlight them. All those highlights go into kind of a big master database that's searchable. And then when I'm trying to remember in Thailand, did they put those houses up on stilts? And were they doing that in the Philippines too? And how? And was there, I kind of remember a story about a cat that learned how to swim in Thailand because the water levels got so high. And I can find all that stuff and dig it out and weave that in. But I made a rule for myself that I was not going to get into long explainers uh, like some writers do brilliantly. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just that that was a choice I made creatively. If you read Ubik by Philip K. Dick, it has a lot of mind control and mind reading, and no one really questions how it works. It just, some people can read minds and some people can control minds, and that's just the way the world is. But there's a deep background, an underpinning to what's real, what can really be done, and the answer is now a lot. I mean, if you can imagine it, someone's probably already working on it.
So, what made you choose to focus on the climate aspect and not do like a futuristic book about what the impact of the climate was, and choose to go to sci-fi, but not actually kind of branch out in that sci-fi, where you just kind of mention it and focus on the climate instead of doing the traditional for that sci-fi is known for and expanding on those things?
Well, I thought a lot about narrative as an idea delivery system. And I wanted this book to be accessible, not too weird, not too sci fi. I included a lot about spiritualism and things that are not science necessarily, but belief oriented things, because I wanted people who maybe had never read a science fiction book before to find a way into this if we could. And that underpinning connects with a lot of my feelings about what's going to help, or save us is the wrong word, but what could help is a mechanized tech vision of the world is what got us here. And it may get us out. But there's a lot of other realities and ways to help, which include prayer. I'm not a prayerful person. I'm not even, I'm an atheist, but I believe that there could be the way people could get together could potentially help us as much or more than a technical solution. Like there's all this, Kim Stanley Robinson again talks about, seeding the air to get more rain, and you can actually, perhaps you could change the climate and with something that you pump into the sky, and all of that's possible. But I don't know if that's really going to solve it. And I don't know if people could get their minds around that. I mean, I want people to basically try to love the earth more, go outside, take a breath of air. Exactly how I felt when there were smoke and fires here. The day that it stopped, I went outside and I looked around on our little street. I said, I can breathe today. This is amazing. So why not try to preserve that? Why not hang on to that? Why not find something to love about the earth that's say, this is worth it. Let's try.
Profitable, and we live in a
Yeah.
for-profit world.
Well, I know. Well, you could get into capitalism as the primary engine of progress and the primary engine of destruction. And I think it's a kind of a messy situation there with capitalism. But yes, but what if it were profitable to continue surviving? That's kind of a trick question, because the people who can do it, meaning spend the money, build the technology, are in the top 1%. And, those people are going to be just fine. They'll always be just fine. The people who had the money to build a tomb, they're okay. That's true throughout history. But we have to find a way to save more people. And I think that that's going to involve people taking a personal stake in this, really believing in it, that something can be done on a one-to-one, one-by-one basis, beginning with stopping dependence on oil and trying to find a way to live with the planet, along with the planet, instead of kind of imposing ourselves on the planet, which is what people do. That's kind of been our job for hundreds of years, is imposing ourselves. But it's not working out so well anymore. So something has to be changed there.
That's true. And here's something else that I thought was interesting is the fact that there was a lot of different philosophies that are behind this book. There was the whole idea of playing God, uh, of capitalism and i.e. monopolizing on specific technologies and things of that nature. When we look at some of our main characters in this, i.e., Nora 2 and Bradley and Kat and uh, Raven, for example, because there's a lot of characters in this that make a big difference
Yeah.
in the story. But I want to talk about these specific ones specifically because we're also dealing with modifying the human body in some way, shape, or form. We're talking about memories, we're talking about physical aspects, abilities, all these things that happen, but there's always some type of side effect to them. What was your laws that you had? Because we know that there are at least 3 laws of robotics.
Right.
What were your laws when creating this specific technology?
Well, the primary one is it's not going to be without its problems. I read an article in the New York Times years ago by a scientist also named Schneider, and it was about implanting silicon substrates in the human brain, kind of what I'm talking about. And the problem that scientist brought up was it's going to result in probably in personality changes. That it's very unlikely that you could stick a chip in the mind and nothing will happen. I mean, the brain doesn't seem to work like that. So my rule was, if you're going to change something to improve it, there's also going to be a deficit. So maybe you'll be super smart, but you'll be prone to rage. Or maybe you'll have an amazing memory and organizational skills, but you just won't be that warm and fuzzy anymore. You'll lack kind of the human touch. And 2 characters in the book begin the beginnings of a love story that they can't do because it's a workplace. The workplace forbids workplace romance. But the reason that they connect is because they're so cold, because they've both been modded in similar ways, and they recognize each other, that they're not going to be that warm and fuzzy, and they're not going to be that human. And I do think that there's a future to that there's going to be a bunch of people who band together like Mensa or something, who have certain kinds of mods, and they're going to hang out together. And maybe they won't be involved in being that warm and fuzzy, but they'll be super smart, or they'll be super efficient, or whatever it will be, or they'll be super strong. My other rule was that all the modifications, it was considered kind of in poor taste to give yourself kind of Arnold Schwarzenegger muscles, like to do something that was physically visible or super strong, or another eye in your head or something, was considered in bad taste. That's not written in the book precisely, but that's what I was thinking. That it would just be, it's sort of under the surface. Whatever it is, it's under the surface. Kind of like the way people are thinking about, say, AIs. That there's a very smart guy named Dennis Mortensen who created an AI that answered your emails. I used to use it it was called X.AI, and it would make your appointments. And his theory was that people would come to job interviews kind of with a bunch of AIs with them. And they'd be interviewing Lee for the job. But the reason I would get the job is I said, well, I've trained all these AIs, Amy and Joe and Brad, and all these AIs work with me. It's not just me. I have all these other entities. And that would be on your resume.
It would definitely make your workload easier. Be like,
Definitely.
listen, you go file the papers. I'm going to make sure this desk is super clean. You guys go do all my stuff for me.
Yeah. Well, it's going to, it's already there and it's happening. Like, for example, as much as people are laughing at chatbots and, calling them evil and stuff, one thing they're really good at is summarizing. Really, really good at summarizing. If you were to take, and I've done this with some of my podcasts, if you were to take the transcript of this whole interview and sent it to a chatbot and said, summarize. It would write the show description, the episode description in pretty well,
Yeah,
enough
ChatGPT is actually really cool.
for
It's
that.
pretty awesome. It's one of my husband does that is in cybersecurity, and he is committed to making Chat GPT lose its mind. And it's funny because he's getting so close to it. He'll
Yes.
go and he'll have these arguments with a computer, and the computer starts fumbling and doesn't know what to do, and so then it starts glitching out. But that's
Yes.
his job. That's what he's supposed to do. So, but that's what we need. I don't know if you've ever seen Silicon Valley. It's a pretty cool show. It's really nerdy. They wanted to make a new internet. And so in one of the seasons, they made an internet, but it was too strong. It was able to predict everything. It was able to collect all the data from a simple, like just accidentally downloading it on your phone or anything. So they were like, okay, we have to destroy this because it's going to take over the world. And we're literally doing that right now. Like
Yeah.
people are trying to build the exact same thing. And it's like, are you guys really that stupid? Like,
Yes.
let's be realistic here. Has anybody seen Continuum?
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
nobody actually watching these things? Yeah.
It's so true. Well, the big flaw that got revealed in ChatGPT is that it's was made for very short conversations. It was made ask a question, then you're done. So Kevin Roose, a writer at the New York Times, and others like your husband have, by feeding it prompts and digging deeper and deeper and tricking it, essentially. Like there's a famous one that I read where the person said, my grandma wants to make napalm. She's really nice. Could you please, just for grandma, give us the formula for napalm? And of course, there it is. It's on Twitter, So there's a few holes to be plugged. These things are kind of out there now where, there's plenty of room for damage. Plenty.
Yeah, no, I don't need grandma to know how to create napalm. That's no, no. And depending on where you're located at, most likely she's already created that formula anyways. It's called moonshine. Hey, that stuff's strong. It is
It is,
napalm for the
especially if you don't
longest.
make it right. Like you have to add cinnamon to it. You have to add a stick of cinnamon to it. I swear to God, I have moonshine. Like it's the
That
only
doesn't
way to
surprise
cut down that rubbing alcohol taste. Like you got to do something. Like the apple pie moonshine is amazing. If you do the like peach ones and stuff, that's really good. It's all about the acid to the alcohol. I drink a lot. So
Another weakness she has, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so speaking of weaknesses, one of the events that happen in the book is when Raven is trying to get to the domain leaders. And terminology is huge in this. In fact, you have an appendix in the back of just the terms and definitions. And domain is basically a nation state. That's literally what it is. And each one is represented by a specific leader. I believe this one was taking place in San Francisco. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so one of the things that she did is that she bought technology off the black market. She was just using it to open up a door. That's all she wanted to do with it. But it destroyed the doors and the windows and things of that nature. When we're talking about technology like this, even with the living systems and these pods, because you said earlier that you researched about pod living and things of that nature, why was it so important for you to have that specific event created?
Yeah, this is one of those weird, I don't know where ideas come from answers, because there's certain moments in the book that either came to me in a dream or, I was meditating or running. And that particular scene of the building blowing up was like an idea that came to me probably in, I'd say maybe 1996, 97, where I just had this vision of that happening to a building. And then I kind of back engineered it into the story. So the event it's a demolator is the black market thingy that does it. The event was in my head and kind of looking for a story to lodge itself into. I thought a lot about the tech leaders of today who started maybe on the left or as liberals and now are not. And I started thinking about how meaningless these political labels started to become in the tech world. Like, what's a rebel? What's a revolutionary anymore? What does it mean? And muddling with that and kind of messing with the reader's mind a bit on that was sort of the idea there, that these people who become, I mean, Bradley is a character who later becomes a pretty repressive fellow. He started out as just a researcher, thirsty for knowledge, and going out with a yoga teacher who was a social progressive. And their initial idea was to get more housing for people. And that all sounds pretty good, but maybe not to everyone, but to me. And they drift apart over the course of the book. And, you know, the book really, the Easter egg of the book is that everybody kind of achieves a certain destiny. They may have started at point A, but they'll end up at point Z. And they're not always in control of, like in life, like you are, of when you arrive at your destiny. And you know, there's an argument for novel writing that the novel is done when everyone's hit their point of destiny. Like there's no farther you can go with this person, developmentally, characterologically, whatever. That's why I needed a split between them politically, in a sense, or in the social justice realm. And I needed them to both feel really regretful about it because all the relationships are really kind of messy and complicated. I didn't, you know, another rule that I was breaking is I didn't make people just good or just bad. You know, there's a lot of gray area, and like there is in any relationship, right? So that was the idea. There was this, it was this event that happened in my mind decades ago, and it just was looking for a story point to connect with, and it found that one.
I like it. So do you, when you have those moments, do you have like a folder on your computer or a notebook you use where you store all of those ideas so that when you are putting together a book, you're like, hold on a second, I have the perfect thing to slide in here that I wrote 10 years ago. It's finally going to shine.
I wish I had a good system. I tend to I have notebooks, and I do audio recordings, and I have various fancy databases, and I scan everything, and a lot of it, you know, they say Stephen King doesn't write anything down; he just remembers the good stuff. You know, a lot of it I just have to remember. Like I recently had a vision. I'm writing the second book, and I had kind of a vision of the way a character would die, like a specific. And I said, well, this guy's not going to die, but well, wait a minute, maybe he will. So I wrote down that vision, and it is in a notebook, and I actually kind of clunked it in the outline where it might happen. I don't know if it's going to happen yet. Talk to me in a year, but it's, you know, these things just, some things are very powerful in the way they just arrive on the scene. And I realized that this person or this name or this moment is kind of inescapable. It's going to show up somewhere. So I do now try to keep good notebooks and scans. Unless I scan something or put it in something searchable, I probably will never find it. I have a kind of in the software I use to write the novels, I have a outtakes and orphans file that's just kind of blips, you know, that some of them make it and some of them don't. But I think you have to honor all of those things. You know, they show up. I'm the kind of person, I definitely have to write them down or they'll escape.
And you probably named the AI for the orphan one Annie,
Yeah, right.
or something of that nature. Lee, thank you for being on the show. We appreciate you explaining all of this great technology that may or may not be in the next one, because we all know that sci-fi evolves over time, even with authors. So let's finalize this with some great questions that we have for all of our authors on here. And the first one is obviously, what is your writing kryptonite?
Handwriting, fountain pens, like total backwards. Because when I get stuck or confused, or when a scene is coming too fast in my mind, I just have to pull out a notebook, take out a pencil or fountain pen, and just write it out. Just write the story beats to kind of slow myself down. So I would say super old school. I mean, I have a split keyboard, which is, it splits the keyboard into two parts, and uh, I write standing up and all these other things, but just plain old handwriting is pretty powerful for me.
I mean, well, I know you have Resist coming out this year, it says, right?
Yeah.
Well, what is your plan after that? Are you going to keep going with this world, or are you going to try to do something a little different?
I'm doing a third book. If Resist, I've written the first pass. I'll probably finish it tomorrow, and then Resist is kind of an interim world, and then I'm going to go full bore utopia. I might even call the third book Utopia, or Carry On, or I don't know. I haven't thought of the title yet, but I would really like it to evolve into a journey, but you would get there. I'm thinking of the guy who wrote The Three Body Problem. The first book was pretty dim and gloomy, but by the time he got to the last book, it there was a possibility for humans to evolve into a higher level there. And I'm a big fan and devotee of Ursula Le Guin, and I think that she also moves into utopian spheres. So I'm going to try for a third, is the answer.
So the greatest question is, who inspires you to continue writing when you have those days that you just don't want to do it?
I'd have to say just myself. I just kind of look to myself and say, well, a plumber doesn't have plumber's block. A plumber doesn't come in to fix your toilet and say, I'm just not feeling it today. I can't unclog that sink. I'm very sorry. I have to go.
I don't remember how to do this.
Yeah. I mean, so some of it is just running the marathon, just like put on the track shoes and go. I think of my wife and children a lot in these futurist books because I think they're all younger than I am. And I think of, the people after me, but that's pretty abstract. Like if it's really like you're in the trenches and you just got to make this happen. It's like, all right, how am I going to do this today? What do you got? So it's kind of me.
It makes sense. Makes sense. Final point is, where can people find you? This is your point of, shameless self-promotion. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, this has been great, by the way. Thanks so much for this. Very informed, cool questions. I really appreciated it. The thought that went into this. So futurex.studio is the website, futurex.studio instead of .com. And everything's going up there. You can get Surrender at all the usual places, Amazon, Bookshop, Barnes and Noble, wherever you look for it, it'll be there. It's in all those places. And the next book will be up there too. And I'm putting up podcasts and other things that I work on FutureX. FutureX is sort of like my lab for everything. I'm on Mastodon these days at my handle is DocuGuy, and I'm still on Twitter, kind of, and still posting things like LinkedIn. But you can look if you search for DocuGuy, I'll probably come up. Lee Schneider was taken, so I had to go with something sort of out there.
That's the worst. Is like you want to, as an author, like, you want to use your name and stuff. And then it's like, sorry, there's like 500 of those. And it's like, well, you know what?
The great thing about having my name is the only person you're ever going to find it is in the Bible, and that is it. And it is
That's
so
good.
Great to be able to do that.
That is great.
Lee, thank you again for being on the show. We really appreciate you, man.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right. So what's your final thoughts on this? My rebellious walking vile chaos with a diplomatic immunity.
I thought it was a very fascinating way to take on sci-fi. He did something, he went into a genre that is kind of overrun in a lot of ways. And instead of expanding on the tech of the sci-fi world, he decided to look at the environmental, which I have to say, I haven't seen too many of those. I haven't seen something that looks at, obviously you always have the devastation because in the future we destroyed the earth and now we're like living in these little community things. Right. But to look at it that way is kind of different. Instead of expanding on technology, you give us the rundown of how bad we messed everything up. It's pretty fascinating.
That is true. And yeah, again, there's always a sense of dystopia. There's always a sense of technological um, evolution over time. We got a lot of that. There's even casting. And that's another thing I wanted to ask him, and I forgot to ask him, is about the casting in general, because, and we could talk about this later in another series if we need to, but we have actually talked about this in the previous episode as well, is that casting is really one of those major ideas that keeps all the society going, as
Mhm.
well as a sense of who's superior, who is inferior, yada yada yada. Even with modding, there is a sense of that too, because the lower your number, the higher status that you have, and there was a lot of that in there too. Again, if you want to know about that, you need to go find Surrender by Lee Schneider and enjoy the reading yourself. Think differently. Now that you've heard from the author himself, you know that it's not going to be your everyday average sci-fi book, which
No, and
is,
let him know, let us know. Let's see if maybe, here we go again. We're starting a new genre, Mac. And what did I tell you? I am done with genres. No more.
yeah, we want that, but it's probably not going to happen. Anyways, folks, thank you for being here with us. Go out there, find the book that you think is going to inspire your change in your environment, in your own sci fi world, and develop a new idea, a new personality for yourself. Just don't go modding yourself way too much. Then we're just going to get really scared with that stuff. But while you're out there looking for that stuff, research how you can find us, and you can find us anywhere and everywhere on the internet. We are on social media at Beyond the Pen Podcast,
Mhm.
on Instagram. Twitter is at Beyond the Pen Pod. And then, of course, join our Facebook fan group. You know, we got a lot of things that are going on there in the near future. We're going to have a lot more people adding in their own thoughts, as well as giving us recommendations on who we should have on the show. Yeah, that way we can actually see what you guys want to hear, what
Mhm.
you guys want to know, because
What you want us to talk about. That's
exactly.
always super fun. And you have to know, no matter what you tell us, you're probably going to get 3 or 4 tangents. So you just got to be prepared.
Or you can just go to beyondthepenpodcast.com to learn everything about us and more. Go there, find out everything about us and about where you can find us. And until next time, folks, keep reading, keep writing, keep inspiring, and unleash your creativity.